The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, welcome to the Greening Local Government third Thursday webinar series. My name is Myla Kelly. I'm the coordinator of the Peaks to Prairies Pollution Prevention Center. Our center is coordinating and facilitating this series, and I'm pleased to have you all here. It's really exciting to be able to highlight some of the wonderful work that local governments are doing around the region through this series, and also some of the opportunities that are available for different conservation practices. Just a little bit about our program before I introduce our speaker today. In cooperation with EPA Region 8 states, which are Montana, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming, Peaks to Prairies encourages the adoption of pollution prevention practices by citizens, small businesses, and local governments. Our center offers access to current information and contacts, encourages collaboration and leveraging of resources between different programs, and builds information systems, websites, and those types of things to enhance information dissemination. Peaks to Prairies is part of the P2RX national network of regional centers that are dedicated to improving the dissemination of pollution prevention information in the service provider community. So we're funded by the U.S. EPA to do this work. We are located at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, and are part of Extension's Housing and Environmental Health program here. Aside from our Greening Local Government initiative, some of our other initiatives include the National Tribal Pollution Prevention Network, which is tribalp2.org, and the Economy, Energy, Environment Initiative for Montana Agriculture, where we're introducing energy efficiency and pollution prevention assessments through our agricultural producers. We, in conjunction with the development of the greeninglocalgovernment.org, which is a new website that we have recently built, we've put together this webinar series designed for local governments, highlighting case studies from communities working towards resource efficiency, energy conservation, and economic savings, and highlighting opportunities that they can take advantage of. As funding for this project came from an EPA Region 8 grant, our case studies come from states in this geographic region. However, the webinar series is free and relevant, I think, to all local governments across the region. Through the series, we've heard from Missoula County, Montana, El Paso County, Colorado, on their efforts to collect household hazardous waste. We've heard on energy efficiency opportunities, grant opportunities from around the region. We've heard about some rural initiatives, some rural transportation initiatives, and today we're going to hear about some green infrastructure opportunities. This series will continue. We will continue to try and highlight case studies and greening opportunities for local governments through the next six months or so. We haven't set the next dates or specifically the topics for those next webinars, so if you have any, we're planning on highlighting green building opportunities, IPM programs, purchasing and office practices, but if you have anything of interest that you'd particularly like to hear about, please let me know. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to say about that? All of these webinars are recorded, and the presentations as well as the recordings can be found on our website, which is, let me just go back to that for a second so you can get that link, which is greenlocalgovernment.org. So you'll find a bunch of case studies from local governments around the region, and also these webinars. So and during our first webinar, we did a kind of an introductory tour of the Greening Local Government website. It's a 7-minute tour, so you can figure out how to use the page, the Greening Local Government page to your advantage. Here's our contact information, and before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to remind you that as participants to the webinar, you are all muted by default. However, we do encourage your participation, and the way to do that is by typing in any questions or requests for additional information into the question pane, and I will make sure that those questions are relayed to our speaker. Again, our webinars are recorded, and they'll be posted on the website that can be accessed right from the home page, and that is that'll be done probably by next week, I would imagine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who is Stacey Erikson. She's been an employee of the U.S. EPA for 22 years. Currently, she works on sustainable development, HUD, DOT, EPA partnerships, urban waters, brownfields, urban agriculture. She's previously worked in a number of programs at EPA, including enforcement, community-based environmental protection, Superfund, and hazardous waste. Stacey spent 4 years on loan from EPA to the City and County of Denver as their Brownfield coordinator. She's also worked on water quality, sustainable development, and affordable green housing issues for the city as part of Greenprint Denver. Prior to EPA, Stacey worked for 3 years at the Department of Energy at Rocky Flats on waste management and environmental remediation issues. She's a Colorado native with a BS in chemical engineering from Colorado State University and an MS in ecological engineering from Colorado School of Mines. She's also a graduate of the Denver Community Leadership Forum and the Coaches Training Institute. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stacey. This is just going to take a second. Okay, Stacey. Great. We see your screen.
You can see the screen and you can hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
That's fabulous. Mila, thank you for the introductions. I'm giving a presentation today on green infrastructure in the semi-arid West. One of the things that we have found in Region 8 is that green infrastructure looks really different than it does in other parts of the country. And a lot of the examples that people see in different places typically come from places like Portland or Seattle or the East Coast, and that it looks really different in the 6 states in our regions. I get a lot of input from people at public meetings and other things that say, you can't do green infrastructure here, you can't do rain gardens here, you can't do permeable pavements here. And actually you can. It just, things look a little bit different. I'm starting off here just with the introduction slide. The picture that you see in the lower left-hand corner is actually the green roof on top of EPA's building in downtown Denver. And that's made with some sedums and some other things that are just grown in trays. And I'll move on to the next slide. EPA has a number of voluntary programs. This sort of maybe the kindler and gentler side of EPA. I think we're probably more known for the enforcement work that we do, but some of the programs that are related to green infrastructure include our Urban Waters Partnership and our Urban Waters Initiative, our Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which is with HUD and DOT, Green Infrastructure, our Water Sense program, which is a conservation program which labels energy, water efficient appliances, shower heads, irrigation practices, those sorts of things. Our Brownfields program, Revitalization, which is now part of our Brownfields office, and then a lot of work that we do supporting FEMA, particularly in flood recovery efforts. There's a lot of issues with stormwater, particularly in urban areas, and the traditional approach is to convey stormwater quickly away from a site to a particular water body, a lake or a stream or detention ponds in some cases. More water coming off paved areas very quickly tends to put huge quantities of water into the water body at a particular time and can do a lot of damage, as you can kind of see from the picture that's up there. And so it causes increased pollutant loading, stream erosion, reduced infiltration. It can change the geomorphology of a stream. It affects the habitat for fish and wildlife. Using low-impact development or green infrastructure is changing the paradigm. It's viewing stormwater as a resource, managing stormwater on site to the extent that it's practical, and reducing pollutant loads to water bodies. Low-impact development is a comprehensive land planning approach, and it's trying to basically look at the pre-development hydrologic regime, and I'm trying to mimic that. And in doing that, it can sustain and restore ecological functions. And it can be applied to new development, redevelopment, or retrofits. It's typically less expensive and easier to do if you do it up front more holistically rather than doing a retrofit later. The picture that you see on this particular slide is actually Northfield Stapleton at Denver. Stapleton is the old airport. I actually live there. This is a particular area that is used as a regional stormwater facility right off of Interstate 70. It functions in addition to capturing stormwater for a very large shopping center that has a Super Target and a Bass Pro Shop and a number of other things. It also serves as wildlife habitat and a great open area. Green infrastructure can be done in a lot of different scales. In large scales, it can be forests, and it's very important to protect those for drinking water supplies in headwaters areas. It can be in rural areas in terms of riparian areas or wetlands, and then it can be ultra-urban areas where you're doing green streets, planter boxes, and other things. But it's very important in terms of protecting water quality, protecting ecologically sensitive areas, and providing opportunities for people to recreate and enjoy the outdoors. Basically, we're trying to take the water and slow it down, spread it out, and soak it in. The picture you see on the top of your screen is actually Westerly Creek at Stapleton in Denver. This was actually a stream that was in a culvert underneath taxiways and runways. It's been restored to a more natural kind of function. Typically, Westerly Creek pre-development was an ephemeral stream with very little stormwater in it. There's some modifications that clearly had to be done because it gets a lot of stormwater runoff and a lot of runoff from folks' lawns. But the picture that you see actually took place at a flooding event, and there have been actually 3 pretty severe flooding events in the last several years. There was one last year that was even higher. The good news was nobody's homes flooded, and everything functioned the way it should in an area, and it conveyed all the stormwater somewhere else, and infiltrated a lot of it, and then conveyed a lot of it to other places. Green infrastructure can be integrated into parks and open space and urban forestry. A lot of parking lot requirements. Typically, a lot of communities have parking lot landscaping requirements, so it can be integrated in that way. It's a great climate adaptation strategy. It's great for smart growth, sustainability, resilience, sort of depending on what words you want to use to characterize that. It's also great for flood restoration, which we've seen a lot of in Colorado. And the picture that you see there in the lower right of your screen actually shows a parking lot with some planter boxes and some landscaping. It meets the landscaping requirements, and you can see the little cutouts in the curbing area that allows more of the stormwater to flow off the parking lot and then water the vegetation that you see there. A lot of different types of green infrastructure. Some of these are sort of overlapping. Green roofs, planter boxes, rain gardens, bioswales or bioretention cells, which are vegetated swales, tree trenches. The rain gardens, bioswales, vegetated swales, tree trenches are all kind of similar. It's sort of more the scale and the type of vegetation that you use in them. Ponds, some folks consider those green infrastructure and some don't. It can depend a lot on how they're designed and what their function is for. Porous pavements, which can include porous asphalt, porous concrete, or permeable pavers. Green streets, complete streets, wetlands and riparian areas, and rainwater harvesting. Colorado doesn't allow rainwater harvesting in very many circumstances. All of our states are a little bit different, but with prior appropriation, it can vary from state to state. Colorado probably being the most strict one in our region, and most people are not supposed to have rain barrels in Colorado unless you're not hooked up to a municipal water supply system. The picture that you see on the upper right of your slide is actually a green roof on top of the Mormon Conference Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. And the picture that you see down on the lower right is actually a bioswale at Fort Carson in Colorado. The value of green infrastructure includes stormwater management, climate adaptation, urban heat island reduction, biodiversity and attraction of wildlife, air quality improvements, clean water, healthy soils, recreation, and quality of life. The picture that you see on the upper right of your screen is actually a development in the River North area of Denver, Colorado. It's a development called Taxi, which was a former yellow cab facility that had some contamination issues that was cleaned up, and it is now a mixed-use development that has office space, residential space, and commercial space. And they were able to do a lot of really beautiful green infrastructure that meets their stormwater requirements, but it also provides a really great outdoor space for the people that live there. And on the picture on the bottom right is another bioswale at Fort Carson, Colorado. This one has irises in it. It's very attractive. There's a lot of additional benefits to green infrastructure, including delaying stormwater runoff volumes, enhancing groundwater recharge, reducing pollutant loads, reducing sewer overflow events. This isn't very typical in our particular region, as we don't have, we only have actually one combined sewer overflow in our six-state region, but it's very common, particularly east of the Mississippi. Increased carbon sequestration, additional wildlife habitat and recreational space, improved human health, increased land values. There have been a number of studies that have showed decreases in crime by having more green infrastructure. There's a lot less splash and spray, ponding, noise, and pollutants that come off of permeable pavements. It can be less expensive than gray infrastructure, particularly in the long term, and if you look at all the additional benefits that occur from it. It's much more aesthetically pleasing, and it makes communities much more resilient, particularly in drought or in flooding events. A lot of discussion around cost of green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. I put just a couple things on here. There's quite a bit of a few words. The picture that you see at the bottom is actually a Denver Housing Authority affordable housing complex in Denver, Colorado. It's not too far from downtown. They were able to save a really significant amount of money by not building a stormwater vault. In ultra-urban areas, a lot of times because of the density, stormwater vaults are put under buildings. They can typically cost up to, around $1 million, which is pretty expensive. So Denver Housing Authority was able to save, they had, would have had to put in an $850,000 stormwater vault, and for $350,000 they were able to put in bioswales and permeable pavements. EPA's building, actually, that we were able to decrease the size of the stormwater vault under the building because of the green roof that we put on top of our building. And Denver Housing Authority, at one of their other developments, which occurs at the Mariposa site near a light rail station, that they actually are going to save $3 million by using green infrastructure over traditional gray infrastructure. And this is a site that actually had a lot of stormwater issues in heavy storm events because the infrastructure was quite outdated. There's a number of other things that I've listed on there. There's a calculator that can help determine some of those. It typically can be really helpful if folks can come together to to do bigger sorts of forms of green infrastructure. It can be a little bit more cost effective to do things that way. Green infrastructure in the semi-arid West is quite different than in other parts of the country, as I previously mentioned. In Denver, we get about 15 inches of precipitation per year, about 300 days of sunshine, infrequent but intense storms that can dump a lot of water at one time. We have a lot of low water native plants. So green infrastructure here, we've had some folks refer to it as taupe infrastructure or brown infrastructure because it really looks quite a bit different than it would if you lived on one of the coasts. And the picture that you see there to your lower right is actually a sod roof in Jackson, Wyoming. A lot of those roofs are used, but they're quite common actually in Norway. Used to be quite common in the United States, not so much recently, but they're making a comeback. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have hardly any combined sewer overflows here, so green infrastructure looks a little bit different. Prior appropriation can change who owns the water and what you're allowed to do with it, depending on which state you live in. Clay soils can make it difficult to infiltrate water. And so design and engineering for infiltration can be really important, and it can be very site-specific depending on the types of soils and what sorts of surrounding things that you have going on there. And the picture you see to your lower right is actually the Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown Denver. And this is their green roof open space, and so it infiltrates stormwater, and it's also green infrastructure as art. Some of the barriers to green infrastructure in the West can include perceived design, construction, and maintenance costs. It's very different maintaining green infrastructure than it is maintaining gray infrastructure. They both require maintenance, but it's a very different type of maintenance. A lot of different governmental agencies and departments. In some places, Parks Department is more responsible for maintaining green infrastructure, but the Public Works Department is the one that has the funding and that focuses on the stormwater piece. So a lot of times it can require a lot of coordination between different agencies and departments. There can be a lot of misperceptions on the economics. A lot of people say it's more expensive. I think there's a lot of materials out there and it can depend a lot on the individual circumstances on what the costs are. But in the long run, and when you consider all of the different items that go into it and the different benefits, that it actually can be less expensive. A lot of green infrastructure is not integrated into regional and site planning. It's a lot easier to do things on the front end than it is to try to do it on the back end. And then it's always really hard just trying to get people to do things in a new or different way than the way that they've done them in the past. The picture that you see on the right is actually Stapleton and Denver again. This is a median that runs down 29th Avenue. It's fairly wide. It has a lot of green infrastructure. It also has running paths on it, and it's very popular for some of the runners and for people walking baby strollers and that sort of thing. The picture you see on your lower right is actually Odell Brewery in Fort Collins, Colorado. It actually, I probably need to get a new picture. The vegetation is much more established now, but this sort of shows how one of the medians functions in a storm event. Some different funding sources for green infrastructure. These are some possible ones. There aren't enormous ones. A lot of EPA's funding is geared more towards design of green infrastructure rather than implementation. Typically our funding can't be used for anything that's required under a municipal storm sewer permit. There's sort of some ways to sort of look at that and to fund some ancillary sorts of things. But Section 319 non-point source pollution grants that the states give out can be used for green infrastructure. It typically is used a lot in stream restorations, but it can be used for a lot of other things instead. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Funds, we haven't had a lot of that used in Region 8. I think there was one project in South Dakota, but typically the states have a 10% green reserve, and green infrastructure falls under the green reserve. Our states have typically used a lot of it for pump efficiency projects, but you can fund green infrastructure under that. And the revolving loan funds can also give out sub-grants in addition to loans. Urban Water Small Grants, that's something new that came out a couple years ago, and that can actually be used for a lot of sort of design and community sorts of projects. Green Infrastructure Technical Assistance through EPA's headquarters office. We are funding a project right now. We've had a couple projects in Denver. Would love to get a lot of projects applying for this from some of our other cities. But we have a really great contractor, Tetra Tech, that will actually do the design work or do the work with looking at ordinances or barriers or other things to green infrastructure in local government. We have some revitalization funding that we've used for a couple of urban stream restoration designs in Denver. A number of brownfields resources, area-wide planning grants. City and County of Denver actually used an area-wide planning grant for the South Platte River to look at redeveloping industrial parts of the river, and they had a lot of green infrastructure incorporated into that. Brownfields job training grants, and then Brownfields assessment revolving loan fund and cleanup grants. The City of Cheyenne's actually using a coalition Brownfields assessment grant to look at brownfields in their downtown area and looking at how they can use those sites to infiltrate stormwater in order to alleviate some of the flooding that they have there. And EPA's Office of Sustainable Communities has a couple of things called Greening America's Capitals and Building Blocks Assistance. Greening America's Capitals, there's actually going to be an announcement coming out on Monday, and if a capital hasn't actually, a capital city has not received some funding before and assistance, they can apply again, and the applications are going to be due July 21st. Here's a few websites and tools. We have a Region 8 website here with a lot of examples from all 6 states in our region of different types of green infrastructure. A great report, barriers analysis, that was put together for the Boulder area. For the Keep It Clean partnership, it was done by Right Water engineers. It's a great assistance. Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, which actually covers the Denver metropolitan area, but a lot of our other cities in Colorado and actually other cities in our states a lot of times adopt urban drainages criteria, either in full or in part. And so the Volume 3 Criteria Manual has a lot of green infrastructure items included in it. And there's going to be a new manual design book that's coming out in conjunction with the City and County of Denver later this year that will also be posted. EPA has a National Green Infrastructure webpage that you see listed there. There's a stormwater calculator that's been recently updated. There was a lot of input from folks in Colorado and Utah into the stormwater calculator, so it's actually relevant to our region. And there's a lot of green infrastructure tools. Also, Colorado State University has a Colorado Stormwater Center, and they have a lot of great tools. They just started up last year, and they're doing a lot of training around design and maintenance of green infrastructure in our climate. And the pictures you see there are the South Platte River near downtown Denver and REI, and you see some green infrastructure that can be used for storm events to take on rising river levels, and then some permeable pavers on the bike path on the South Platte Greenway on the lower right. We've used some green infrastructure funding on a number of projects here in our region. A lot of these I've already mentioned to you, so I'm not going to mention them again. We've funded some design charrettes for green infrastructure, and the picture that you see there to the right is actually a stream restoration design that was done for a very urban area. The stream actually goes into a culvert on the north end of the site, but this is done in a very low-income area along Westerly Creek in between Lowry and Stapleton. We've done some green infrastructure charrettes, and we've had a number of lessons learned that came out of these. We've actually done them for a lot of affordable housing developments, but it's really helpful to look beyond project boundaries to get a more comprehensive approach. It's really helpful to identify all the stakeholders in the stormwater planning on the front end. There's a lot of trade-offs that occur between water quantity and water quality solutions. It's helpful to look at the goals and metrics before you go in. Very helpful to collaborate with all the different city departments to make sure that all of the needs are met. Really innovative solutions may require a little bit of research and testing, and city policies may actually limit some of the things that can go in. This was actually a project that we did for the Urban Land Conservancy at a development that's going to be going in near a new light rail station. And this is through our Green Infrastructure Technical Assistance and our contractors, Tetra Tech. This shows you the site. It was very industrial, very urban. It has a new light rail station that's going to be opening early 2016. Urban Land Conservancy owns part of the site. This is sort of what it looked like before. It was pretty nasty. It had some minor contamination issues, but largely a lot of trash and a large homeless population living in the building. And we had a design charrette in conjunction with Housing Colorado. A lot of students, in addition to 2 architects and a lot of city folks came in, actually did a design that encompassed some other adjacent sites that were owned by some other folks, but they were able to come up with a site that infiltrated the stormwater from over a 100-year storm event, and to do it without any ponds. And they were able to do that through permeable pavements, green roofs, and landscaping. And just sort of basically analyzing the site and then looking at the possibilities. And it's much easier to integrate it on the front end than I mean, typically buildings get designed and then people think about what they're going to do for the stormwater at the back end, and they're like, oh yeah, we have to do that, and then it becomes a lot more difficult. It's a lot easier if you do it in the very beginning. Our contractor Tetra Tech provided a number of toolbox examples. This shows you some different pictures of bioswales, green roofs, and permeable pavers, some boxes that look at runoff from roofs, and then some underground detention. I'm not going to go into this in detail. This is actually just looking at some of the engineering that was required in order to determine how much runoff that you needed to deal with the different designs. A lot more engineering mumbo-jumbo here, looking at different types of green infrastructure practices and sort of the surface areas and how much water they can infiltrate. Lots of O&M considerations for green infrastructure, including monitoring infiltration and drainage, possible pruning and mowing, mulching, watering and fertilizing, removing and replacing dead plants, looking at inlets and outlets and under drains if those are part of the design. And all of this is usually done on different frequencies. And the picture that you see there to the right is actually Stapleton. Again, this is Greenway Park. It's actually in the fall. This particular installation required 3 years of irrigation to establish all of the vegetation that you see there. And that's pretty typical, 3 to 4 years of irrigation in a dry climate before the plants get established. Some more lessons learned from the particular design charrette that we did with the Urban Land Conservancy. Oh, in case folks don't know what a charrette is, it's a design workshop where you bring a lot of people together, sort of a fancy term used for that. A lot of these are really similar to what we had from the other design charrette, so I won't go into that. And that's it. And so I'm happy to answer some questions if folks have some questions.
Yes, Stacey, thank you so much. Yeah, I have quite a few questions, and I just wanted to encourage you, if you, anyone who is listening to, if you have any questions, you can still type them into the question pane, and we'll get those answered. So one was regarding the calculator that you mentioned in one of your first slides, and whether that just factored in stormwater or other considerations.
I think I mentioned two different, there's a calculator that talked about cost, and it does factor into some other considerations, and then there was also a stormwater calculator on EPA's website that basically helps you. It's actually an interesting tool where it actually takes into account soil data from across the country and weather data and looking at storm events, and then you can do things like, you know, decide if you want to put in a green roof or a rain garden or something else, and how that impacts your infiltration and your stormwater runoff.
Excellent. And then the other one was for? was for not just stormwater, but additional considerations. Is that what you just said?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
And the first one was for also factored in some additional considerations, correct? And so we'll
yes.
post those. We'll have both of those tools along with the presentation. We'll post a link to both of those tools on the website as well. Another question was with all of the different engineering that can be involved, have you seen local governments typically hire an engineering contractor, or do local governments usually do this in-house?
I've seen both. I can tell you, for example, Denver, which obviously is one of the larger cities in our region, where they've done some in-house and where they've also hired some. One of the projects I mentioned, they hired an engineering company to help them do some particular ultra-urban designs that were actually helping them with the manual they're going to develop. They're doing it in conjunction with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. And typically what was happening is we have, for example, a developer that's redeveloping the old St. Anthony's Hospital, and they're demoing buildings and cleaning up the site, and they wanted to do some on-site green infrastructure, but some of the ordinances didn't allow them to do some of the things, and it took them almost a year to negotiate with the city for their needs, and the city, I think, is realizing that they don't want, a lot of developers don't have a year to come in and negotiate all of that. Excuse me, I need to get a little bit of water here. So they're actually going to have some pre-approved designs, and those particular designs are being designed by an engineering company. But I've also worked with some folks in the Stormwater Department. We helped with a green infrastructure design along the South Platte River, and we were working with the Parks Department, and it ended up, I think, through probably a series of miscommunications. We ended up helping to bring in the Public Works Department, and the engineer who worked in the Public Works Department actually helped them with some designs in order to use the park to capture some of the stormwater runoff from the parking area. So I've seen both done, depending on the municipality and sort of who's available and also the size, obviously.
Okay. Great, thank you. One other question was whether you could give any examples of porous pavement options that you've seen work in our semi-arid region.
Well, I've actually seen all three, the porous concrete, porous asphalt, and the permeable pavers. In the Denver metro area, we've had a few problems with some of the permeable concrete. The permeable asphalt seemed to function a little bit better. Urban Drainage and Flood Control District actually brought an expert out to do one parking lot, and it didn't actually work out very well. Typically the issue is just like pavements in any climate, the mix is a little bit different, and permeable pavements are the same way, and so you have to get the right mix. It can't be too wet because then you close off the pore spaces inside it that helps infiltrate groundwater. For a while, Urban Drainage actually put a halt on using the porous concrete until they worked out a few details. They're also looking at something else which they call slotted concrete, and I actually didn't have a picture of that in my presentation, but there is a picture on our website where you install normal concrete and then you cut slots in it in order to infiltrate the water instead of using the other type of porous concrete. Typically, it involves somebody that really knows what they're doing. It is different than using a regular concrete or asphalt. The pavers are a little bit different in that they're a little bit easier and requires a little bit less expertise on the installation.
Great. Excellent. And I have one last question, unless anybody else has any more, and you can feel free to type those in. The last question that I have up here is whether green infrastructure, where green infrastructure has been implemented in local governments, who have you seen has been the champion for that, i.e. public works or parks and recreation departments?
I've actually seen it in a number of different cases. I've seen it from the Public Works Department. I've seen it in the Parks Department. Some cities have a natural areas program that's sort of another offshoot of the Parks Department. And then also community planning and development. I've seen a lot of it champions there also.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I just would like to say again, too, for the different funding sources that that Stacey listed earlier, we'll try and get links for all of those funding sources and just you know, create maybe a separate little page or something so folks can find can access those from our homepage too. So we'll work on doing that, and again, the presentation will be posted as well as the recording. If you would like to share that with any of the folks that you work with or pass on the link, please feel free to do that. And I think that looks like that will wrap up our webinar for today. Stacey, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me. I actually have someone new helping out. His name is Billy Bunch, and we'd be happy to help get back to you. And I'll get you, Mila, the updated presentation, and I'll also get you the links for all of those funding sources.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
Well, everybody, enjoy your almost summer solstice, and thank you for joining us.